Okay, I would like to call to order the Special Finance Committee budget hearing of July 28th, 2020 at approximately 1 p.m. Can I have a roll call, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
I'm here.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Here.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Present.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Here.
and Counselor Romana Beta.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a quorum. We have approval of the agenda. We are gonna hear where we left off yesterday from the Public Works Department, specifically the Buckman Direct Diversion. And then after that, our other action item that we have on our agenda is approval of the operating budget for fiscal year 2020, 2021. Is there a motion regarding the agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Romana Beta.
Yes. Okay, so when this item was postponed last week, there were several issues that came up. I will try to summarize them and then we can maybe get a short response from either Mr. Jones or whoever he designates, and then we could get into questions from the committee. But the budget is $6.4 million or a 23% increase. And so something that was asked for were historical numbers, historical budgets versus actual. There was a discussion, or there was information regarding a lawsuit that we're facing, and that may be one of the reasons for the increase. There was also a comment made regarding the city's contribution and its relationship to the amount of water that we're able to get from BDD. There was also some questions regarding the city's role in the management of the BDD. And then, of course, we're dealing with a COVID year budget and a budget process during COVID. And so it would be good to hear what historically, how this budget has been adopted as it relates to the larger budget. Is there anything that I missed? Okay, Mr. Jones, do you want to go ahead and either address it or have somebody start addressing these issues?
Mr. Chair, members of the Finance Committee, thank you. If you don't mind, I'll just briefly go over the arrangement of information that was put together in order to attempt to answer any questions. We do have Facility Manager Rick Carpenter is also on the panel, along with Mackie Romero, the Fiscal Manager there at BDD. Thank you for going back over some of the questions. I know that sometimes the details get kind of complex, but ultimately the information that was provided was an overview of the contractual relationship between the city and county. That's page 2 of the packet. Talks about the agreements and how costs are allocated. Really kind of defining some terms like what's a shared facility, what's a project-wide facility. Again, get into the details. That's what determines what portion the partners pay, right, for that type of service. That also carries on onto page
And
3.
Mr. Jones, are you referring to a document that we were given or just the original? What are you reading from?
I'm sorry. Because I sent out an email to the individual council members on Friday, Saturday.
Okay.
And I believe, I think Romero Worth I'd also seen had forwarded that attachment. So I'm referring to the attachment that was in that email. And I can send that again.
Counselor Villarreal, Mr. Chairman, I did forward that email to you, Counselor Villarreal. I noticed you weren't on the
I just
original.
wanted to make sure it wasn't another document that we were sent. Thank you.
Yeah, it was that
Mr.
document.
Jones, that's the City of Santa Fe memo dated July 24th, 2020. And the
That is
attachment?
correct, Mr. Chair. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I could share the screen, but I know I don't want this to be the first time people are seeing the information. I apologize, Councilor Villarreal. You were left off the original memo. Sorry, the original email, and I think just a few hours later, I sent it just to you individually, and then I know the next morning, Councilor Romero Worth sent it again because she realized that you were not on that.
Very good. Thank you. I just want to make sure it was the same document. Thanks.
Okay. So then onto page 3, then it talks about the budget process, kind of once we come out of the agreement and why the city's the project manager. I'm not going into the details because I know that you can read that, and we are available for questions, but I want to be sensitive to your time. So again, on page 3 of the memo that was sent, kind of describes the BDD process, right? That BDD staff prepares a budget. The intent would be is that staff would meet with the partners. And I know these meetings occur throughout the whole year. BDD staff, I think, has a great working relationship with the partners and the key players through that communication. But ultimately regarding the budget, that the partners would be involved in the development. So again, the partners know exactly what's being presented to the board. Once the BDD board approves and sends for recommendation, so it's our intent to have that before the board. I would say, I think in December is when it's required to have that before the board to kind of go through a discussion process. Ultimately, with the target of having that approved and recommended by the BDD board around February. Then at that point, the partners, mainly the city and county, would take that portion and incorporate it into their utility budgets as they're going into budget developments. So for the city's portion, that would be included in the budget like it is that we're seeing today. And would go before the city council. Once that is approved, then the budget would be returned back to the BDD board for ratification and acceptance to start their fiscal year. So I'm going to say ideally, maybe missing 1 or 2 interactions there, but that's kind of how the BDD budget process would be developed. Moving to page 4, Mackie was able to put together a great map and just share that. It shows, again, the breakout of what's a shared facility, what's separate for just Los Campanas, and what is city county. So what portions of the projects, where they're at spatially, what components they are. And again, you can see the percent breakdown of cost for each one of those segments. And then page 5, we did put together a sheet of budget to actuals, looking at actuals for 3 years, the base budget, and then the recommended budget that went to the BDD board. And Mackie, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but page 5 is showing that the recommended budget is recommended by the BDD board.
Mr. Jones, the recommended budget on that page is actually the reduced version of the budget.
Thank you, Mackie. So, so the recommended budget is what is what the water division is recommending. And it's really developed as part of being able to meet the target of budget reductions across the water division that developed that recommendation. In addition, then on page 6, we extended that out for the term of the project to show just linear graph of budgets to actuals across the project. And then on page 7, Mackie was able to provide a more detailed summary, kind of breaking down what the repair and maintenance of systems and equipment, contractual cost of the supply categories. Moving to page 8, talks more about those are contracts brokered through the agreement, contracts with federal agencies, state agencies. Really just a lot of details on what that money is spent on, right? What are the services that we're buying? And then the last page, page 8, continues that with actual revenues, meaning what is paid to, and then how those expenditures are broke up into those categories. Again, this packet was put together and it's an attempt to answer any kind of some of the questions that were coming out of the project. I think if I could, I can kind of summarize where we're at today is BDD did develop its budget on time, right in December. It went to the board. They forwarded it with a recommendation. That budget was included in the Water Division's budget and ready for submittal. And then really due to really the pandemic and some of the stuff that we've been going through the last few months, target reductions, right, were pushed to the divisions on how they achieved that. Part of the work that the Water Division did to achieve its targets was recommending a reduction in the BDD's budget, mainly driven on budget to actuals. Again, anywhere that I could reduce budget without cutting service, that was our first and foremost priority is being able to do that. That recommended budget did get incorporated into the project, into the budget process, and was what was being discussed. So right now there is a difference between what the BDD board has recommended to the city to approve and a recommendation from staff trying to align the Water Division with its budgeted targets. With that, Mr. Chair, we're happy to stand for questions and would like to turn it back over to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Shannon, I just want to be clear on page, it's the page after the map. My pages aren't numbered. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The budget to actuals, the FY 2021 recommended budget is the city staff's recommended budget, not the budget that was recommended by BDD, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so we have an issue. So just to make sure I'm understanding this, so in December you go to staff and you figure out what the budget is. Then then you bring that to the BDD board. The BDD board approves that budget as a recommendation to go back to the city and the county for their approval. So the county commission approves it, the city council approves it, and then it comes back to the BDD, and those approvals by the city and the county are done in their normal budget processes during the spring. And then it comes back to the BDD board roughly in July to ratify essentially what the budget that was recommended and then approved by the city council and the county commission, correct?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Camaro Worth, that is correct.
Okay, so this year, just to be clear, what's different is you met with staff in December, you went to the BDD board passed a recommendation, and then because of the COVID shutdown and because of COVID related shutdowns, and then because the city is in a budget crisis, we have not approved what the BDD board had recommended to the city. So we're a little behind, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so what's before us today are the changes that were recommended by city staff because of our budget problems. And they also, in this document on page 5, show how everybody's contribution would be lowered under these new budget numbers. So, correct? Let's just take this one step at a time.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Worth, that is correct.
Okay, so so if you go to the map, right, and it says, and this has been an issue brought up, I think, in these finance committee hearings and at the BDD board, this idea that if the city is going to contribute less, they should take less water. But the way this is working out is the city covers 60% of the project-wide costs, the county 30%, and Las Campanas 10%. And what these budget figures that we have here reduce the contribution of all the partners and stay in line with the percentages that are outlined according to the various agreements that we have, right?
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, so this idea that the city of Santa Fe should take less water if we were to approve what the city is recommending doesn't quote unquote hold water, right? Because we've reduced everybody's percentages by the same amount and we're in line with the agreements. Again, those being that 60%, the city covers 60% of the project-wide costs, the county 30%, and Las Campanas 10%. Correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay,
I
so I
don't know
just,
if Mackie- I apologize. I don't know if Mackie wants to add a little bit because again, the budgeted number, again, the budget is just money set aside, right, to meet a projected cost of the project. As the BDD goes, it actually bills the partners actual cost as it goes. And so project-wide, shared facilities, so fixed and variable costs. So your water use does affect your percentage. I think historically, I'd be surprised if it moves at more than 1 or 2% historically. But ultimately, when we're looking at the budget, is what percent of the actual expenditures that BDD would bill the partners for. And so even though there's an approved budget, whatever the cost of BDD is, that gets allocated to the partners for payment.
by those
And
percentages, right? So we're not changing those.
Yeah, do you want to speak to that a little bit, Mackie, on what would change?
Yes, so Mr. Chair, members of the board, it is a little bit confusing, but the percentages that do get changed are project-wide and variable costs, and that is based on water. So I sent out, the partners provide a projected amount of water that they're going to take for the year. And that's the number that I use to develop the budget for project-wide costs and for variable costs. And I think what you're saying, Councilor Romero Worth, is that those percentages did not get affected. You are correct. With the reduction of the budget, those percentages still stayed the same. So the amount of water that the city projected to take in 2021 remained because we cut the budget overall, the whole budget. And so the reduction was not only for the city, but for the other partners. But as far as the water numbers, the projected water delivery numbers remain the same.
Yeah, I just want to, so that's helpful because I think I want to address this issue that somehow the city should take less water because we're contributing less. We're not contributing less. We're in fact adjusting the budget as a whole for all the partners. So we can put that concern to rest, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that's the first point I just wanted to make. Second, to go to Shannon's point, this other graph where we're looking at historic budget to actuals, or budget to expenses, I guess it is. The one with the it's kind of an orange budget line and then a blue expense line. And I don't know, maybe for people who don't have access to this packet, can somebody put this on the screen?
Mr. Chair, I can share that if you would like.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you, Shannon.
Okay, is that what you're?
The next page, the one that shows the graph line, it's the expenses and the budget line. Like, it's 2 more pages in. I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That one, that's perfect. Yeah. All right. So on this, we can see historically that we have budgeted well beyond historically what we have spent, what we have actually spent. Correct, Shannon? and Mackie, whoever wants to.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Councilor.
Okay. So I also want to put to rest this idea that somehow by changing the numbers, we are going to make the facility unsafe, or we are not going to be able to produce safe drinking water, because we can see here that what it costs to run the facility and produce safe water is well below what we have budgeted over the years. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Worth, I would say that that is accurate. We over project. And
And
therefore, difference.
Okay, and I mean, I don't know, Mary or Mackie or Shannon, somebody, I mean, is this good budgeting practice to be budgeting well above what your expenses are? Shouldn't we be trying to move these lines closer together?
So if I can take that, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, that is BDD's goal every year, is to try to close that gap between actuals and budget. As you can see from 2012, we've definitely gotten better at that. Because we use these percentages to project the budget, it makes it really difficult to determine what partner percentage the partners are going to take, especially because a lot of it is driven on actual water deliveries. That is always the goal. We do have, in the past, we've had vacancies that also causes us to not spend a lot of the budget. But we do always readjust. I build the budget from zero. I don't do this model of a base budget and then increase from there. I start from zero because we use cost codes and we have to project exactly where the costs are spent, and we adjust for that. So if we think we over projected in one line item, then we readjust for that and move it to where we need it. And so I think we really do try to get there.
Right, and so I appreciate that, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, Mackie, because I don't want to necessarily, suggest that this is, I don't know, that there's blame here. There's complexity, I guess, is the thing, but I also want to, make the point that, again, we're producing safe water. We're budgeting more than our expenses. So the fact that the city, given its financial crisis, needs to bring these numbers down a little bit, we're not putting the facility in jeopardy. And in fact, we've got money that we're budgeting or encumbering. We're not able to do what we need to do on our side because we've got money that we've said, oh, you can't spend it because it's put aside, it's encumbered over here. And so when you're in a budget crisis, right, you don't want to be encumbering money in places where it's not going to be needed, because it inhibits your ability to put it where you do need it, right? So this is this tension, I think, between how you're budgeting, how the BDD is budgeting, and the situation the city finds itself in right now. Anybody want to comment on that? All right, chickens.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I understand. But yes, we are not, the reduction is not going to affect our drinking water and our standards. So
Okay.
I do your statements.
All right, so I think what's in front of us today then is, I mean, this has been I think, helpful exercise. I know, I'm a member of the BDD board. It's been helpful to have, I think, the city council and the finance committee understand the nature of this board, that it is an independent board, that the BDD is There are lots of legal agreements that govern how it operates and how we share the facility, the costs and the water and all of that. So I think this is all very educational. I think it's also been educational in the budgeting of stuff and understanding, you know, where we need to continue to pay attention, which is, you know, the tension again between how Mackey builds the budget from zero and how, you know, how that's working with the, you know, the historical numbers and the fact that we are over budgeting from what our actuals are, and just understanding that tension and trying to get that to narrow as we move forward. So I don't know. I guess the other thing that I think we need to pay attention to long-term, and it doesn't really show up in our materials, I don't think, Mackie, unless you can show it where I would see it. But this facility is expensive in the sense that there's a lot of overtime that is accrued by the employees of the BDD. Is that correct? Is there anywhere where that stands out in the stuff that we have?
So the materials that you were provided, it's all commingled under salaries and benefits. But, you are correct. In the past, we have spent a lot of money on overtime, and most of that was due to you know, vacant positions. I think in 2018 we had, you know, almost 11 vacant positions. We are almost fully staffed, and I know our operations section is now fully staffed. And I know our operations superintendent is definitely looking at that and trying to come up with creative ways to look at the schedule and hopefully reduce that in the future. I don't know if Mr. Carpenter or Shannon want to say anything more about.
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute. Yeah, Mackie's correct. We have staffed the operations section in a way through the years that has been, we believe, pretty functional. But that doesn't mean that that's the way it always should be going forward. And so I will be working with the Water Division Director and with our operations superintendent to look at alternative ways to perhaps schedule those hours and reduce some of that overtime.
Okay, and I just want to point that out because I think that's something that the Finance Committee needs to keep an eye on, and I think, you know, it's something that the BDD board will also need to keep an eye on going forward, especially now that the facility is fully staffed, and just understanding, you know, what's necessary to be running that facility and how we go about doing it. So I just want to flag that for our attention as a longer term area that we all need to be paying attention to. So I think, you know, those were the questions I had, the things that I wanted to make sure that we underline and provide information on. I think, you know, the question for us is whether we, you know, so we have two sets of numbers out here. We've got what the BDD board provided, and we've got what our city staff provided. There is a difference. And I guess that's what the decision is here of the Finance Committee and the City Council as a whole is, what do you want to do here? Which, you know, do we want to go with what the BDD says, or do we want to go with what we have laid out here, targeted based on our situation, budget situation at the city? And I don't know how we go about making that decision. I guess maybe we need some guidance.
I'm on that point, though. If you go back to that graph, Mr. Jones, that Councilwoman Romero Worth had pointed out, with what the city's recommending would still be underneath what is proposed to be expended. Is that right? Or is this graph based on BDD's budget?
So the graph is based on BDD's budget.
How- So how much closer would it get the lines? Well, I guess I could look at the page before, we would still be over if I'm looking at the page before that, because if you look at their actual expenditures for last year, they were 8.5 million. The year before, 7.7, the year before that, 6.6. So even at 8.5, we're still proposing more than that. We're proposing 9.2, right, total?
That is correct from all the partners.
Okay, so even if we approve the cities, then it would still be more than what was spent last year.
So Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm sorry, I don't mean to make this more confusing, but the recommended budget here is a revised that BDD staff did. The one that the city has in their budget is actually much more of a reduction. It brings, I think it's the only one to contribute about 6,011,809. And so that was a way bigger reduction. This was the one that staff had prepared that we felt like we could actually do, which was this 9,280,000. So there was actually 3 budgets, just to be clear.
Okay, so the one that the city recommended originally, would it still be more than 8.5 million, or would it be less, or would it be 8.5 million?
So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, with the city's reduction, I had to cut the budget by 1.4 million. So that would have brought our budget down to about 8.8 million.
Okay, and so that is cutting the 2 lines closer together, because the expenditures last year were 8.5 million. So
That is correct, but we do have, we are fully staffed now, and so that line item was also brought up, and then we do have litigation costs, which, as you can see from the budget to actuals, are definitely growing.
okay, so, but how difficult is it, Ms. McCoy or Shannon, as we progress through the year, if we see that this litigation, because the opposite sometimes happens with litigation too, where things get stalled out and you don't land up spending a lot of money that you thought because of the delay in the system or whatever was going on with the lawsuits. So my question is, how difficult would it be, Ms. McCoy, to put money into the budget if we start seeing a shortfall or going to run into a shortfall?
Mr. Chair, we would have to bring forward a budget adjustment, both to the Finance Committee as well as to the governing body for a vote. So that would take that's about a 2-week process.
Okay, and the funding source though isn't GRT, right? How will the money for BDD, it comes from what source?
It comes from the water division's operating cash.
Which we have plenty of, so there's not going to be a situation where if we have to do this, and even though it does take 2 weeks, it won't be a situation where we're having to cut anywhere else because it was so tight trying to fit, trying to balance this budget because of the source. Is that right, Ms. McCoy?
Mr. Chair, that is correct.
So I'm confused, Mr. Chair. So are you talking about what's laid out here in the FY 2021 recommended budget, which to Mackie's point is what BDD, I guess what Mackie, what you recommended, right?
Right, and what I'm talking about is if we go, what BDD's recommending now, the revised recommendation is 9.2, which would be 6.4 from us. And then what the city is recommending is less, which would bring the total budget to 8.8. which is still more than their actual expenses last year by $300,000.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing I would say is, to your point about the litigation costs, this lawsuit is supposed to go to trial in this fiscal year. So I think, and I think, I don't know, we might want somebody to weigh in, but litigation costs, I think, tend to go up, not down. Which would argue that maybe we should go with the BDD recommended numbers.
Okay, Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we have a copy of the city recommended budget anywhere that we can look at? Because it's really hard to be making these decisions when I can't be comparing these two budgets. Unless is the only difference in the recommended budget from BDD to the city is it only the litigation cost, or is there other differences? Are there other differences?
Okay, Mr. Jones or Ms. McCoy, do we have a breakdown that shows the city's original proposed budget for BDD? And can we put it on the screen?
I'm working on that right now, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you.
And then while we're waiting for that, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, you had asked about the fund. Mary, I'm so sorry. Can you repeat what you had said about where the funding would come from if we pass a more stringent budget to begin with and then see that it's not going to be enough? That would come from the water fund, correct?
Mr. Chair, Counselor, yes, that is correct.
We're not really cutting the water. There would be money in the water fund most likely if we needed it for this, correct? We're not really cutting that one down to the bone or anything. I see Councilor Romero was shaking her head, so I'm going to assume that's a yes.
I mean, I think long-term, we want to get those lines, are the actual expense to budgeted. We want to get those as close as possible. I don't know. I think that's the tricky piece here, is that it is a litigation year, and you know, maybe it does make sense to go with the BDD numbers.
I'm thinking the same thing, because of the lawsuit. And then maybe after we put this lawsuit behind us, we can take a look in future years of how we can close that gap. And I think, and then plus, I think there also has to be ongoing discussion about the scheduling and the built-in 8 hours of overtime. That might be able to bring that gap down too. So.
But I think this has been important, because I think we are all much more aware of the governance structure around the BDD. We are much more aware of some of the legal agreements between and among the partners, and we're much more aware of the tension between the different methodologies and budgeting. And so this is all really important long-term as we go forward. So this has been, you know, I think a worthwhile conversation. And, you know, as often happens in budget crises, you know, we really take a hard look at how we spend money and how we budget money, and we learn things and we do things differently. And this has been, I think, a good exercise. So.
I agree. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez, do you see is it on your screen? And I would say, Mr. Jones, it's the item that's highlighted, like that's in blue or gray.
That is correct. So this is the 6 million.
Right, yeah, I do see that it's the aggregate. It's not really the breakdown of what that difference would look like from the BDD. So where, I guess my question would be is what line items would be impacted by the city's recommended budget versus the BDD reduced recommended budget?
So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I did put together that schedule for the BDD board that if you give me a minute, I can look, I can put it on the screen. It was presented to the board in June. But to get the city to that $6 million number, like I said, BDD had to cut its budget by $1.4 million. And that included, so I can show you what that looks like that I did present to the board if you just give me a minute to pull it up.
And while you're doing that, I mean, I think the other thing is to realize that this is a significant line item. This is a significant expense for the water division. So I think that's also something to be cognizant of, why we want to, be paying attention to what we're spending here and making sure that there's a good basis for it.
I mean, also to that point, we've talked a lot about how this is going to be a very different year in terms of our budgeting. We're going to be doing a lot of budget adjustments. And I'm not sure, because of the, complex nature of BDD, but if we are moving forward with this budget and we're noticing that we are not on track to spend as much as we have budgeted, does that then become something that we'd be interested in looking at it and pulling back some of this budget, and how possible would that be with the complexity that goes into the BDD budget and also working with the county and Las Campanas?
So on that point, that's a good question. So what happens as we go along in the year? Because like if we go to that budget page, the budget for the revenues that were proposed last year, so what happens when they don't meet their expenses, don't meet the revenue? What happens to that extra revenue? Are we billed throughout the year, so we just stop getting billed, or we're billed for less?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, you're correct. So you're billed based on actuals, and whatever money BDD does not get from the partners just goes back to the partners' respective funds.
Okay, and so you bill us how often?
So the bills, they vary. They are done monthly or quarterly, project-wide, or done at the end of the year, because that's based on annual water usage. And so I don't know the annual water usage to the end of the fiscal year. So there are several bills that get sent to the partners throughout the year.
Okay.
I just sent you the presentation that was presented to the board in June that had the city's a lower number compared to the board's approved budget.
Okay, so if we approve the recommended, like the middle, the compromise, which is 9.2, we may not even get billed for that total amount. So it's not like we're shifting money over tomorrow or whenever the budget gets approved, and then we better use it or else we lose it or it goes into cash savings. It's actually to build on actuals. So am I correct?
That is correct.
Okay, Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez, does that help?
Yes, that does. Thank you.
Okay. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez, you still have the video. Do you have other questions?
I was still waiting to see the numbers side by side. Was that emailed to us, or because I'm not getting it?
Sorry, I just sent it to Shannon so he could share. I couldn't share my screen, so.
Okay.
Other than that's the only thing I'm waiting for at the moment. So other than that,
Okay. While Shannon pulls that up, are there other questions from the committee members? Councilwoman Vihel Coppler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to say, or just remind everyone, I'm not speaking in my council role, but as chair of BDD. And on behalf of the BDD board, I want to say that, I think this exercise in bringing the BDD's budget before the finance committee and ultimately before the city council is a good one. It's one in which the board has been talking about for some time. And I believe it came as a result of the board feeling like it wasn't consulted on things and such. And so there's no other better way than to help public servants and the public understand how the budgeting works. It is a very complex situation, and it's one in which there obviously are 3 partners, and each one has their own set of opinions about how things should run. But I think the first step is to have this communication, to understand what the statutory requirements are of the board, how it was set up, the several items that the board's attorney, Nancy Long, presented at the very beginning of the BDD board budget whenever we started this, I can't remember. But I think this does accomplish a good understanding of how things are developed, how the monies work, and the litigation costs are something that can be somewhat planned on, and whether they go up or down, who knows? But I think it's a good idea that we invoice based on expenses. Although we do have a contract with the attorney law firm that's representing BDD, and those contracts have to be adhered to. I am hopeful that we wouldn't need to spend all this money. Hopefully there would be some resolution in the coming year, well, the year we're in, but even up to next year, we don't know. But I think we're being very adequately represented, probably more than adequate, and the board is satisfied with that. But I appreciate Ms. McCoy allowing the BDD budget to be presented on its own. I appreciate the discussion that you all have allowed BDD members and staff to have. And the BDD meets next week, actually. We will be taking the budget discussion back to them, and whether it goes to the county, I think it depends on which budget's approved by the council ultimately, but if it's different, it has to go back to the partners. So I'm not envisioning that there's going to be a long discussion or changes about it, but it's something that's in the process. I will reiterate Mackie Romero's points that we have had a big shortage of employees over the last year, many vacancies at once, and it's very encouraging that the vacancies have been filled, and hopefully the overtime costs definitely can go down because of that. So things are looking good in the employment side of BDD. I believe that the board also understands and recognizes that we get great assistance from public utilities, from Shannon and Jesse, and certainly from our director, Rick Carpenter, and Mackie Romero's budgeting skills. She keeps the board in line every month we talk about budget. So I appreciate the time that's spent here on behalf of the BDD board as its chair, and I'll report back to them after a decision is made. And I want to thank the Finance Committee for your efforts in understanding all this, and appreciate the time that you've taken. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see Ms. McSherry on, and I wanted to ask her a question about the legal contracts. I remember when the litigation was happening, when Councilor Ives, I believe, was the board chair. Most of those were coming to us in executive session. And is that still the case, Ms. McSherry? Would that still happen?
Renovata, Councilor Rivera, let me make sure I heard the full question. Was the question whether or not litigation discussion could happen in executive session about the pending litigation for BDD?
That and spending, legal spending. So if they needed, I don't know, a certain amount in order to continue litigation, or to move forward with litigation, would that come to us in some fashion through executive session?
Counselor Chairman Abeyta and Counselor Rivera, so the discussion could happen in executive session. The expenditures, it sounds like the BDD's, I think, directly contracting with counsel. I've met with the outside counsel for this matter previously, along with Nancy Long. But oftentimes when we enter a new contract for litigation, that would be an opportune time to discuss it in executive session as well. So it's highly likely that when that contract was entered into or amended, that we did go into executive session to talk about the reasons for the litigation or the reasons for the amendment. But the amendment and the contract itself, it's entirely possible that we did not have an approval of it.
So if they needed additional funding, more than what was initially approved, how would that process work?
Chairman Abeyta, Councilor Rivera, I believe that basically the amendment would go to the BDD board if there's a needed amendment. It depends if they're exceeding the amount that's already authorized in their legal contract. And then if the budget was too low for that, we would have to have some sort of a budget adjustment.
And would that request, how would that request come through to the governing body?
In terms of like the specific staff involved in that type of thing, that would be administrative decision. But basically, it would be similar to any other budget adjustment that you have with this body. You might also need to amend the overall budget with the BDD if it's going to change that.
So even though it involved litigation, it wouldn't be discussed in executive session or come through your office at all?
Councilor Abeyta, Councilor Rivera, I think often we are kept in the loop on the progress of the litigation, and we would certainly be able to work with Ms. Long to go to executive session to talk about the litigation, but the budget adjustment itself isn't an authorized reason for an executive session.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to thank Councilwoman Romero Worth and Councilwoman Vigil Koppler for really taking a step back and really looking at the budget. You know, I'm sure this committee will do what it needs to, but I appreciate the discussion. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I can just make a comment about the litigation contract.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, committee members, so the BDD board has already approved the amendment for litigation services, our contract for fiscal year 2021, and that is the $2 million that's in the budget. So any reductions would not touch that line item, which is why it made this exercise difficult, because we are already in contractual obligation with our litigation attorney at this amount, and that was discussed in executive session with our attorney.
Okay.
Yeah, my question wasn't about reductions. It was about additional costs that would need to be spent. So how those would be decided by the council or brought to the council. So that was that discussion.
Okay, so with that, Mackie, so as I understand, the 2 million is gonna be there, but you had to make reductions other places, and that's where Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez was going. So can you explain to us where you made the other reductions?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, so with the city's $6 million recommendation for BDD's budget, in order to make that work with our budget, I had to cut the overall budget by $1.4 million. And given that salaries is 3 million and litigation is 2 million, you know, and then we have electrical costs and chemicals, those things, you know, we can't really change because they're based on how much water we produce and the quality of the river, made it extremely difficult to cut in other places. So I did cut in salaries. We have 2 vacant positions. In this presentation that you see on the screen, I I don't have those positions being filled, even though one of them is the position that we do need in our maintenance department. So on the recommended budget that staff did, I have one of those positions being filled, but on this one, both of those positions are not being filled. And I also cut all of overtime just to bring it down to the 335,000 reduction. I also had to cut electricity costs. Again, this is just a projection, and this one is hard because it's based on water quality and how much water we produce in the year. That's what drives our electrical costs. But I did cut that by $247,000 to try to get to the number that the city needed. And then we cut materials and supplies and other operating costs. Materials and supplies, that's where the bulk of our maintenance of equipment, our on-call contracts, operating supplies, that's where the bulk of that is. And so I had to cut that by $654,000. On BD recommended, we do cut that. We did cut out some of our capital asset purchases that we wanted to make in the current year. But with this that the city was originally requesting, we had to cut a lot. And so this budget was definitely going to be more difficult to operate with than the recommended that staff prepared, just because we were trying to get to a targeted number. And with the complexities of the percentages, it makes it that much more difficult. If there's any more questions.
Okay, Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
I don't think I have any further questions on that. I appreciate you going over that line item by line item. So regardless, I think that would be really interesting for us and just help with our education is probably in about 6 months. I'd really like to see another presentation from BDD about budgeted versus actuals and where we would expect to be with the year. So yeah, I don't have any further questions. Thank you for bringing this onto the screen.
Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ms. Romero. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. My computer is a little slow today. This, Andy, can you mute yourself, please? Thank you. From this particular budget we're looking at now, what was the line item you said that cut overtime?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, that would have been in the first line item, the salaries. So salaries, benefits, and overtime are all commingled in that line item. And so I cut 335,000 compared to the other version you saw, which I only cut $270,000. And that was in this version, I had to completely cut overtime and not fill 2 of the current vacant positions.
Okay, thank you. And based on what you were just saying about all the cuts, so are we then considering the proposed reduction, if I can see it, 8.5? Or are we considering going back to the original BDD proposed version, which was what, the 9 point, I can't see it now, but.
Yeah, it was a almost $9.2 million.
Because it wasn't just about litigation costs, it was a whole slew of other portions of the BDD that we, from our section, that we had to cut, including those vacant positions. So I know we keep talking about this, but I'm not sure what we decided, if we were going to go ahead with the original that was proposed or the city version based on the cuts, which I'm assuming it's based on the overall, like our overall budget and what we're projecting through finance as a whole, not just this department, but the whole city. So how does that affect our projections for our budget deficit as a whole? And I don't know if finance can answer that.
Mr. Chair, councilors, again, this would be taken out of our cash reserves. any additional amount over what was proposed in the budget, whether it's now or via a budget adjustment in the coming months.
Okay. From the water fund. Got it. So what are we doing? I mean, I appreciate all the information. It's very helpful. I was just trying to figure out, based on this new information you just presented to us side by side, which was very helpful. Are we proposing then to move forward with the BDD recommendation?
Okay, but we're talking about, there were three. There was the original BDD recommendation. Then there was this revised version, which is 9.2 million, right, Mackie, with our proposal being, our contribution being 6.4.
That is correct. So that one is staff, BDD staff recommendation, and then this one is the cities. So you're right, there are three. The BDD board approved one, the BDD staff one, which was the 4 for the city, 9.2 for BDD overall. And then this version here on the screen is the one that's in the city's budget at 6 million, which would cut BDD to 8.8 million.
Councilwoman Villarreal, did you want to make a motion? I mean, I'm willing to support the staff recommendation. It's kind of the middle ground between what the city proposed and what BDD proposed. Knowing
I'd
that
make
we may have to
motion.
come back and adjust it.
That was my suggestion, but I was trying to figure out, I wanted to see them all three, but does this have all three? It's really small. I'm sorry. I can't see very well.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I'm sorry, it does not. This was prepared before I had prepared the staff version.
Can we get a copy of this? Shannon, can you forward this to us, just so we have it?
Yes, I can do that now.
So I'm inclined to support the BDD staff version.
Okay, do you want to make a motion?
But I wanted to hear maybe from folks that were on the BDD because I'm not on that board. So
I would second that motion.
Okay, there's one member from the board. Do you want to hear from Councilwoman Vihel Koppler? She's the other
Yeah.
member. of the board.
actually, I would just like to hear what she thinks about the three versions as a city councilor perspective, not a BDD member.
Oh, good question. Councilwoman Vihel Koppler, you're on the spot.
Oh, I've been on the spot before. Thank you. You know, I support I'll say I support the BDD's staff version because it's well thought out. I think it's more bare bones than what we have experienced. But as far as a city councilor, you know, we have avenues to come back and readjust. And the fact that we don't invoice, we invoice for expenses is also kind of a safety net. So I'm very comfortable with this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second. Any further discussion? Can I have a roll call, please? And this is, and just to restate the motion, it is for the staff recommended city funding of $6,443,979.
Say that number again, Mr. Chair.
$6,443,979.
Thank you.
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
yes,
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
yes,
Counselor Romana Beta.
Yes. Okay, so that motion passes. Now we need a motion on the public utilities budget to approve their budget. This was the only item we had outstanding.
Move to approve.
We have a motion. Is there, we have a motion. We have a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
yes,
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Romana Beta.
Yes. Okay, so that budget is approved. That concludes all of our department budgets. Altogether, we approved 22 separate budgets over 6 days and 24 plus hours. We do have to make a decision or a motion on the entire operating budget. And so what I would like to do is I'd like to give each of the governing body members and the finance committee members, if you want to make any last statements regarding the budget, we can go around and do that. But I would really like to wrap this up because the finance department they literally have 24 hours to put together a presentation for tomorrow. And I think they need to get to that sooner rather than later. So with that, let's start with the non-committee members. Councilor Rivera, did you have any comments or last minute statements regarding the budget itself before we make a recommendation to the governing body?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I trust that your board, the finance committee, has done their due diligence. I don't think I'll have many questions tomorrow night when we bring this up, and just want to thank your committee for all the hard work that they do. I listen in, and sometimes I have questions, sometimes I don't, and I've been on that side. I know how difficult it is, so thank them for all their great work, as well as staff, the finance committee, all the directors that had to really make some hard decisions and make some cuts. It's a difficult time, and I just wanted to thank them all for their hard work. And thank you for allowing us to sit in and acknowledging us when we did have questions. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Rivera. Councilwoman Hill Koppler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to echo Councilor Rivera's points about the hard work that the staff has put into preparing this budget. I'm sure there's many hours worked over, as well as the departments who presented the budgets. Some of them maybe had to work through their furlough hours for free to wait and see how things were going to pan out. But I really appreciate the work that's been done and the work on behalf of this committee. The only comment I would say about the budget itself is that I know we just got the FTEs emailed to us by Ms. McCoy, and I want to thank her and Bernadette Salazar for doing that. So I'll need some time to digest it. And I may have questions tomorrow about it, but I haven't had time to take a look for good. So I'll just say, thanks for all the work you've done. It's been nice to sit in and be able to walk away from the camera for a while. And I appreciate that you all have stuck it out and sat in your chairs and done the hard work. So thanks for everything. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to echo the thanks to, all of our staff who has been presenting and who's been able to answer these questions and get us information, and especially our finance staff. I know that we have asked them to continually produce a lot every day after they sat in these budget meetings with us and then went and worked at night to get that information to us. So I do really appreciate it. I've said this from the beginning. I fully expect this budget to change frequently this year. I think that this budget is operating on a hope that things will continue to improve. And so that is something that I've really just wanted to be keeping in mind, that there's still a lot of unknowns here. And so I really want to thank everybody for putting in this work and for trying to gather information and make your best guesses based on a completely unknowable situation. So thank you. This has been an educating experience for me as my first budget hearings. So I really appreciate looking in depth into everything that's going on in the city. And thank you so much to my fellow committee members for all that I've learned from each of you throughout this process as well.
Thank you. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Chair, and thank you for the staff. I know we are very demanding, but there's a lot of information additional information other than what's been presented that we need to make informed decisions. So I know it takes a while to compile that data, but it does help, and we do look at each of those items. I think there's some items that we had questions on that I'm still wanting to go through to make a better informed decision about the overall budget. I think there's some strong points to this budget, some weak points to the budget, and some kind of pieces that are still outstanding for me. I mean, I feel like in some sections of this budget, it's set up as if the reorgs are going to occur. Specifically, the community services budget is assuming that 4 different departments will be combined into community safety, health and safety. And so that's hard for me because it's already setting it up as if the reorg is going to be occurring in that fashion. So that's what I'm struggling with. I'm still struggling with Parks and Rec being separated. And again, I feel like their budgets are reflective of potential reorg. So these are things that I know we're going to be discussing, but there are aspects of this budget that are structured in that the reorg is actually going to happen the way it was presented. So I still think there's a lot to be discussed on that end. But I do appreciate finance working with the information they have, given that it's been late coming. And yeah, I think that I will vote this forward to the governing body, even though there's still some information and questions that I have that I still need to review. But it's by voting yes, it's really moving it forward so that we can have a larger discussion from the governing body, and also getting feedback from the public, since we will only have one opportunity for the public to weigh in. And in a way, I think it's kind of short-sighted because at that point, there's a lot of things that have already been discussed, and it's not like we're going to go back to the drawing board to be able to address some of the concerns from the public. And we do read those emails and all the information that people have sent us, concerns and support for different aspects of our budget, but that's a very small percentage of public weighing in on this budget process. Other than that, again, thanks to all the different departments and staff for putting in a lot of time for this budget process. And I also want to thank the chair for leading us, keeping us on track, and putting up with our moments of, I guess, just trying to figure out like how to dissect the information. It is somewhat frustrating, I have to say, conducting our budget hearings on a virtual platform. It's really hard. And I'm sure it's also hard for the public that those are weighing into. So, or that those people that are actually been watching our process. So other than that, I'll yield the screen. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be concise. I would just say thank you to the staff across both the finance committee staff and or the finance department staff, then also all the other departments that have come before us. I know this has been a major focal point for everyone for a long time. It's an exceptional year. The uncertainty that we are dealing with and budgeting around is extraordinary. And I think to Councilor Cassett Sanchez's point, this is not the end. We are going to be budgeting for the next year at repeated intervals. As we learn more about what our revenue situation looks like and what this pandemic will do as we move forward in dealing with it. So I don't think this is over by any means. It goes to the governing body tomorrow night, and we're going to be talking about budgeting continually. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. I also am grateful to staff. This was a hard year to put a budget together. I mean, this was, it's based on our best guess and projections that are reasonable. I think they did a terrific job. And I think that this council gave good guidance on what we were looking for and what our expectations are. I feel honored to serve on this council and this committee. This is a hardworking committee. I appreciate everyone on it. Everyone shows up so well prepared and with such good questions. I miss that we can't all be together. I think that's really hard for us. We like each other. We like seeing each other. We fight hard and we hug hard. So, I think the public should know that we miss each other. We miss being together. As far as the actual budget goes, I think you guys have covered it very, very well. I think I think that this is not the end of the budget this year. I think that we're gonna have a lot of changes through the year. Hopefully those changes feel like opportunity instead of having to drag ourselves back in and make more hard decisions. I'm optimistic. There's some areas in this budget that, I scratch my head at a little bit and I'm worried about. I can get into the weeds pretty far with things like land use and I think we have a terrible shortage of inspectors right now, and it hurts us in terms of economic development and trying to keep us on track and moving forward. To have contractors waiting around to get inspections, that's hard for us and that's hard for them. And those are the kinds of into the weeds things that I rely on our administration to look at and to change within this budget. The Parks and Rec, I have concerns about that also. I'll wait to hear more on how that can work. The new health and safety. We have to find a way to fund the positions to respond to the calls that the police are not in. It's not that they don't respond to them. They do. They respond to thousands of them a year. Is there a better way to respond to those calls? I think so. And I think that the police are in a better position in terms of having filled vacancies than in a very, very long time. So I think that that's a budget that we can look at in the future as to how to shift around how they do some of their work. And I think that the public's very much interested in having us do that. And I would be remiss to not thank our illustrious chair who kept us out of the weeds, did not let us drown in the puddles, which it's easy to drown in the puddles of this at times. So thanks, Chair, for keeping us on track and not being short with us when I know sometimes it is easy to get out into the weeds and questions that probably weren't particularly budget oriented, but I think you did a terrific job. And again, I'm deeply grateful that I get to serve on this committee with the people that are on it. You do a terrific job. Thank you.
Thank you. And, I just in closing, the reason why I'm able to be effective as a chair is because of the committee and the questions that the committee that you ask the question that the other members of the governing body ask, and then the information that the staff provides. You ask what I'm thinking or the questions I have, you guys, you're all over it. And it's nice because then I can focus on running the meeting and keeping us moving along. So thank you. As I said earlier, 22 separate motions over 6 days and 4-hour days. It was tough, a lot of work, 7 days, it was tough. And so just again, thank you to the governing body, the committee and the staff. I think this is a team effort and we are all on the same team at the end of the day. So with that, I will entertain a motion to approve the operating budget for fiscal year 2020, 2021.
Move to approve.
We have a
Second.
motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes,
Counselor Renee Villarreal.
Yes, to forward the budget for governing body deliberations.
Okay. Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Romano Beta.
Yes. Okay,
Thank
and
you.
with that, then we are adjourned. Thank you. Good job, everybody. Yeah,
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
bye.
see you guys.